In a regular town with regular houses and regular people, there was this guy named Mr. Harris. You know, the kind of neighbor you say hi to, but never really pay much attention to. Well, behind that ordinary facade was a tale that would make your skin crawl. Let me tell you about the Thompson family. Nice folks, just like anyone else, they moved into a cozy house next to Mr. Harris without a clue about the nightmare waiting to unfold. Amy Thompson, a teenager with a knack for late-night snacks, started feeling something off whenever she passed by Mr. Harris's place. One evening, as the Thompsons settled in for a movie night, the power went out, rain drummed on the windows, making the night even spookier. Mr. Harris, being the seemingly friendly neighbor, knocked on their door offering help. Amy's dad, a bit skeptical, but not wanting to be rude, let him in. Now you'd think it's just a neighborly gesture, right? Wrong. Mr. Harris, with his awkward smiles and piercing eyes, started lingering around like a ghost that just won't leave. Amy felt this weird vibe, like he was dissecting their lives with his gaze. As the night dragged on, the Thompsons couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Doors creaked and shadows danced in the corners. Amy, curious and a bit freaked out, decided to investigate. She tiptoed down the hallway, avoiding the squeaky floorboard like a ninja in a horror movie. And there he was, Mr. Harris, standing in the dark hallway, his eyes gleaming like a cat about to pounce. Amy, with her heart pounding like a drum roll at a scary circus, asked what he was doing. He mumbled something about checking if they were all right and slinked away into the night. It's the next day. Things got weirder. The Thompsons found notes on their doorstep, cryptic messages that sent shivers down their spines, stuff like, "I see you or the night knows your secrets." It was like a bad horror novel unfolding in their lives. Amy's mom, scared as a mouse cornered by a cat, decided to confront Mr. Harris. But he denied everything, his eyes innocent pools of confusion. The Thompsons, though, weren't convinced. Nights turned into a living nightmare as strange sounds echoed through their home. Whispers, footsteps, and the occasional unsettling laughter. One night, as Amy lay in bed, she heard scratching at her window, like a cat trying to get in, but more sinister. Trembling, she peeked through the curtains and saw Mr. Harris, his face pressed against the glass, a twisted smile plastered on his lips. Terrified, the Thompsons called the police. But guess what? By the time the officers arrived, Mr. Harris was gone. Like smoke in the wind. The police chalked it up to a prank or maybe a wild imagination. The Thompsons, though, knew better. Days turned into weeks, and the Thompsons lived in constant fear. Every shadow seemed like Mr. Harris, every noise an impending threat. They installed security cameras, changed locks, and even considered moving. But Mr. Harris, like a relentless ghost, haunted their every step. The breaking point came when Amy found a doll on her doorstep, its eyes staring into her soul. Attached was a note. "I'll always watch." That was it. The Thompsons packed their bags, leaving behind the house that had turned from a haven into a living nightmare. As they drove away, they couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. Amy glanced back, half expecting to see Mr. Harris in the rearview mirror, his twisted smile fading into the distance. The Thompsons never saw him again. But the scars of that creepy neighbor lingered, a chilling chapter in their lives that they'd never forget. Late at night, just when you think everything's cool, the creepiest stuff can happen, like the time my neighbor went bonkers and made me question every horror movie I'd ever seen. It all started innocently enough. We live in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone waves and pretends to be friendly. You know the drill. Boring, peaceful, and nothing ever happens. So there's this dude living next door, right? Average-looking guy, middle-aged, nothing special. We'd exchange nods and the occasional small talk. But then, one night, things took a turn for the freaky. I was chilling on the couch, binging some mind-numbing TV, when I heard this weird noise outside, like scraping or scratching, but not the usual neighborhood sounds. Being the nosy type, I peeked through the blinds, thinking it was some raccoon or stray cat. But nope, it was my neighbor, Mr. Creepshow, wearing this twisted grin. He was scratching something into my fence with a rusty old knife. At first I thought I was seeing things, but when I looked closer, my stomach did a somersault. It was some messed up symbols, like something out of a horror movie. Naturally, I confronted the dude. "What the heck are you doing, man?" I asked, trying not to let the nervousness creep into my voice. He just stared at me, eyes wide and vacant, like he was possessed or something. I didn't stick around for an exorcism. I booked it back inside, locked every door, and tried to forget about the whole thing. But, of course, it didn't end there. The next day, I found more of those creepy symbols on my mailbox. Now, I'm no expert in ancient languages, but this stuff looked straight out of a cursed manuscript. Goosebumps crawled up my arms as I wondered what kind of crazy I was living next to. Things got worse when I started hearing strange noises at night. Footsteps outside my window, whispers in the darkness, the whole haunted house package. It felt like I was living in a real-life horror flick, minus the bad acting and predictable plot twist. One night, I swear I saw shadows moving in my backyard. I grabbed a baseball bat, ready to defend my turf, but there was no one there. Then came the notes. Creepy, handwritten notes left on my doorstep, filled with cryptic messages and dark threats. Stuff like, "You can't escape, and I'm always watching." I didn't know if it was a sick prank or if my neighbor had lost his marbles, but either way, it was like living in my very own nightmare. One evening, I mustered the courage to confront Mr. Creepshow. I banged on his door, ready to give him a piece of my mind. When he opened up, his eyes were bloodshot, and the stench of something foul lingered in the air. I asked him straight up, "What's your deal, man?" He just grinned that twisted grin and whispered, "You can't escape the darkness." At that point, I didn't care about being polite or neighborly. I called the cops, told them about the symbols, the notes, and Mr. Creepshow's ominous whispers. They did their cop thing, searched his place, and found a basement straight out of a horror movie. It's dark, damp, and filled with all sorts of weird symbols and occult paraphernalia. Turns out, Mr. Creepshow was into some seriously messed up stuff. The police found evidence linking him to a local cult that had a thing for creepy rituals and sacrifices. I couldn't believe it. The guy next door, the one I'd exchanged nods with, was part of some occult nightmare. The authorities hauled him away, and the neighborhood went back to its dull, quiet self, but the scars remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the shadows still whispered in the night. It made me question the safety of my own home and the people living next door. So here's a lesson from my own personal horror show. You never really know your neighbors behind the friendly smiles and casual small talk. There might be something lurking in the shadows. Keep an eye out, stay vigilant, and don't be afraid to call for help when things get creepy. Because sometimes the real horror is closer than you think. The regular neighborhood, the kind where you think you know everyone and everything seems cool until one day. It's not. I lived in one of those places, thinking I was safe, until my neighbor turned my life into a real-life horror movie. So there's this guy next door, unassuming at first. You'd never think twice about him, just a face in the crowd, but then things got weird. I started noticing him watching me, not the casual glance, but a creepy, intense stare that sent shivers down my spine. It was like he knew something I didn't. One evening, I heard a knock on my door. Opening it, there he was, Mr. Creepy Neighbor. He had this eerie smile plastered on his face, the kind that makes your stomach churn. He handed me a plate of cookies, said he made too many. Seemed innocent, right? Wrong. Those cookies tasted off like bitterness wrapped in sugar. Just after that, the weirdness escalated. I'd catch him lingering near my windows, just standing there, staring. It didn't matter if it was day or night. He had this habit of being a creepy statue on my property. I started feeling like a character in a bad horror story, the one where you know something awful is about to happen. Then came the messages. Not the friendly neighborly notes, but cryptic, threatening letters that showed up in my mailbox. Words like "I see you," and "you can't hide" scrawled in a way that made my skin crawl. I was living in my own personal nightmare, and Mr. Creepy Neighbor was the monster under. One night I heard strange noises outside, like whispers in the wind. I peeked through the curtains, and there he was in my backyard, holding a doll. Yeah, a freaking doll. It was like something out of a horror flick, the kind that messes with your head, so I didn't dare confront him. Instead, I called the cops, hoping they'd put an end to this madness. When the police arrived, they searched his place. Turns out his house was a hoarder's paradise, filled with creepy dolls, newspaper clippings, and a bizarre obsession with his neighbors. The walls were covered in pictures of people from the neighborhood, each with their eyes scratched out. So I couldn't wrap my head around it. The guy had been obsessing over us, collecting bits and pieces like a deranged puzzle. The police questioned him, but he just smiled that unsettling smile, claiming innocence. They couldn't find anything concrete to charge him with, and that's when the real horror set in. Living next to this guy who had a twisted fascination with us, who seemed to enjoy the fear he instilled. Days turned into sleepless nights. I hear footsteps outside, tapping on my window, and I knew he was out there playing his sick game. I installed security cameras, but that only fueled his obsession. He'd stand just outside their range, watching, waiting. One day, I found a doll on my doorstep. A mini-me with buttons for eyes. That was the last straw. I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and moved, leaving behind the nightmare that had become my life. A sense of relief was palpable, but the trauma lingered. Even now, in a new place with new neighbors, I can't shake the paranoia, the fear that someone somewhere might be watching, waiting to turn my life into another horror story. It's a reminder that monsters don't always come with fangs and claws. Sometimes they wear a neighborly smile and hide in plain sight. All right, gather round and let me hit you with a tale that'll make your skin crawl. So I used to live in this average neighborhood, nothing special, just your usual houses lined up in rows. One day, I realized that the guy living next door wasn't as normal as he seemed. It all started with these weird vibes. You know when you feel someone staring at you? Well, it was like that, but on steroids. I'd catch him peeking through his blinds whenever I stepped outside. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just nosy or bored. Little did I know. It was the calm before the creepy storm. One evening, I'm chilling on my porch, enjoying the last rays of sunshine. When he strolls over, no friendly wave or casual nod. He just stands there, staring at me with this intense, almost hungry look. I'm thinking, what's this dude's deal? But instead of saying anything, he hands me a plant, a freaking plant, out of nowhere. I ain't no plant expert, but something about it felt off, like it didn't belong on this planet. After that, things took a nosedive into the Twilight Zone. Every time I stepped outside, he'd be there, lurking in the shadows like a character from a bad horror movie. I'd hear strange noises in the middle of the night, like someone dragging heavy stuff across the floor. The kind of noises that make you question your sanity. One day, I decided to confront him. Knocked on his door, ready to ask if he had a thing for staring contests. When he opened up, the air turned thick with an unsettling vibe. I kid you not, the dude had this bizarre shrine-like setup in his living room. Candles, strange symbols, and photos of the entire neighborhood. I'm standing there, mouth hanging open, wondering if I stumbled into a horror flick. The guy notices my shock, but just smirks, like he enjoys freaking people out. Before I can say anything, he mumbles about protecting the neighborhood and slams the door shut. I'm left standing there, wondering if I should call Ghostbusters or the actual police. From then on, it's a descent into madness. More weird gifts show up on my doorstep. Creepy dolls, handwritten notes with cryptic messages. I'm thinking, is this dude for real? But the scariest part is when I notice he's collecting stuff from my trash. Yeah, you heard me right. Dude is sifting through my garbage. Like it's... The breaking point comes when I wake up in the dead of night to find him standing in my backyard. No flashlight, no logical explanation. Just him, staring at my house like he's plotting world domination. I'm not Captain Courageous, but fear can make you do crazy things. I grab a baseball bat, rush outside, ready to give him a piece of my mind. But when I get there, he's gone. Disappeared into the shadows. It's like the dude can teleport or has a secret tunnel to the underworld. I ain't Sherlock Holmes, but I know when something ain't right. Panic sets in. I start questioning my sanity. Maybe I'm imagining things, maybe it's all in my head. But deep down, I know this is real. A neighbor straight out of a horror novel. The breaking point comes when I find a doll hanging from my front porch like some creepy voodoo ritual. At this point, I'm done playing Nancy Drew. I call the cops, spill the beans about the weird gifts, the shrine in the backyard stalking, the whole creepy shebang. The police show up, search his house, and uncover a horror show. More shrines, more bizarre symbols, and a wall covered with photos of everyone in the neighborhood. Turns out the dude was documenting our lives like a twisted scrapbook. He gets carted away, probably to a padded cell, and the neighborhood lets out a collective sigh of relief. But here's the kicker. Even though he's gone, the fear lingers. The unsettling feeling that someone out there knows way too much about you. Someone who might be watching from the shadows. It's a horror story that doesn't end with the credits rolling. It stays with you, a lingering nightmare you can't shake off. So there you have it. A true tale of a creepy neighbor straight from the depths of suburban horror. Be careful who you share a fence with, folks. You never know when your neighbor might turn your life into a spine-chilling thriller. All right, buckle up, because I've got a tale that'll make your hair stand on end. So, there I was, living in this regular neighborhood, nothing out of the ordinary. Everything seemed fine until a new neighbor moved in next door. Now, I ain't one to judge a book by its cover, but this guy gave off vibes that made my gut scream. Danger. At first, it was the staring, the kind of intense, unblinking gaze that sent chills down your spine. I'd catch him eyeballing me through the windows, like he was sizing me up for a horror movie role. No hi or friendly wave, just that creepy stare that made me question my life choices. Things took a turn for the weird when he started leaving odd things on my doorstep. Not your usual neighborly gifts like cookies or a casserole. Nope, this guy was on a whole different wavelength. One day, it was a black candle. The next, a peculiar-looking rock with strange symbols carved into it. I'm thinking, is this dude into witchcraft or just trying to freak me out? But it didn't stop there. The late-night shenanigans kicked in. I'd hear eerie sounds drifting from his place. Whispers, like some ghostly council was plotting evil schemes. It was the kind of stuff that makes you question whether you accidentally stepped into a horror movie set. One night, curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to snoop around. I sneak a peek through his window, expecting to catch him brewing potions or performing his songs. Instead, what I saw was a room filled with mirrors, wall to wall, ceiling to floor. Now, I ain't an interior decorator, but this wasn't your typical home decor. It felt like I stumbled upon the lair of a horror movie villain. The next day, the real nightmare began. I woke up to find a doll hanging from my doorknob, the kind you'd see in haunted houses. It had buttons for eyes and a twisted grin that made my stomach churn. At this point, I'm convinced I'm living next to the neighborhood's own resident psychopath. I decided it was time to confront this neighbor. From the depths of creepiness, I knocked on his door, trying to keep it cool, asking if everything was all right. The dude opens the door with his cold, dead expression. No explanation. No apologies, just a cold stare that sends shivers down my spine. Straight up asked him about the weird gifts. The whispers, the room of mirrors, the whole creepy circus. And you won't believe what he says. He claims it's all for protection, that he's warding off some unseen evil. Protection? From what? The neighborly apocalypse? As the days passed, it only got worse. More bizarre gifts, more late-night rituals. I started avoiding eye contact, doing my best to live my life without getting tangled up in whatever horror show he was orchestrating next door. But the fear lingered, like a dark cloud hanging over my everyday routine. Then one night, I heard chanting. Low guttural sounds that sent shivers down my spine. I peeked through the blinds and saw him in the backyard, surrounded by candles, muttering something I couldn't understand. It felt like I stumbled upon a scene from a supernatural thriller, and I was the unwitting audience. See, enough was enough. I called the cops, spilled the beans about the weirdness next door. They showed up, checked out the mirror-filled room, the creepy dolls, and the backyard incantations. But here's the kicker. They couldn't find anything illegal. No breaking the law, just a guy living his best horror movie life. So, here I am stuck next to the neighborhood's resident oddball, wondering if I'm in some twisted episode of a reality show. The creepy stares, the weird gifts, the chants in the backyard. It's like a horror story that doesn't end. So I can't move. Can't escape the feeling that I'm living next to someone who's a few screws loose. So the lesson here, folks, is to beware of your neighbors. You never know when you'll end up living next door to someone straight out of a horror novel. Keep an eye out, trust your gut. And if things get too weird, don't hesitate to call for help, because sometimes reality is scarier than anything Hollywood can dream up. A quiet neighborhood, just like any other, where you think you know your neighbors. But then, there's this one guy living right next door who turns your sense of normal upside down. I'm talking about a real-life horror show that unfolded in the everyday lives of a regular family. One day, out of the blue, this neighbor starts acting strange. No warning, no signs. You're just a sudden shift into the creepy zone. It starts with odd hours. You'd see him lurking around in the dead of night, staring at his own house like it's some haunted mansion. And it's not the kind of I'm having a smoke on the porch stare. It's more like he's having a staring contest with his front door. Now, normal folks would think maybe he's just a night owl. But this wasn't your typical late-night TV watcher. No, this guy had a vibe that whispered, "Something ain't right here." Then comes the tapping. Imagine sitting in your living room trying to catch the latest episode of your favorite show, and suddenly you hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud, not forceful, but enough to make your skin crawl. You'd look out the window, and there he is, tapping on his own windows like he's sending some Morse code to another dimension. At this point, you're thinking, okay, maybe he's got a weird bedtime routine. But then the tapping gets closer. It's on your windows now. Your heart skips a beat, and you freeze. You're praying it's just a tree branch, but deep down you know it's not. This is the kind of horror you can't escape, happening right on your doorstep. And just when you think it can't get any weirder, the guy starts leaving strange items on your porch. Not your typical friendly neighbor gifts, like a casserole or a basket of muffins. No, we're talking about dolls. Creepy, button-eyed dolls with limbs twisted in unnatural positions. They show up like unwanted guests, silently announcing, "I'm watching you." You start wondering if you're living next to a horror movie villain. Is this a sick prank, or has your neighbor crossed into the Twilight Zone? The dolls pile up, each one more disturbing than the last, until your porch starts resembling a cursed toy store. One day, you find a doll that looks exactly like you. Button eyes, twisted grin, the whole shebang. It's like a personalized nightmare delivered straight to your doorstep. Panic sets in, and you realize this isn't some innocent neighborly weirdness. This is a full-blown horror story unfolding in real time. So you call the cops, thinking they'll put an end to this nightmare. They show up, take a look at the dolls, the tapping, the late-night staring. But here's the punchline. They can't find anything illegal. There's no breaking and entering, no direct threats. It's just a neighbor with a penchant for the bizarre, dancing on the edge of legality. Now you're trapped. Every night you hear the tapping, knowing he's out there lurking in the shadows. The dolls keep coming like a twisted subscription to a horror-themed toy club. You're living in a suspense movie with no climax, just an endless loop of creepy encounters. Then comes the day you notice something more unsettling. Your neighbor has installed security cameras, not to protect his own house, but pointed directly at yours. It's like he's turned your home into his personal reality show, and you're the unwilling star. You feel violated, exposed, and the fear intensifies. The nightmare culminates when you wake up one night to find him standing in your backyard, wearing a doll mask that mirrors the ones he's been leaving on your porch. Your heart races as he raises a finger to his lips, signaling silence. It's a horror movie moment that freezes you in your tracks. So you've had enough. You decide to pack your bags, leave the horror show behind. But as you're loading the car, you hear the tapping again. It's not coming from your windows. It's coming from the backseat of your car. You turn around, and there he is. The neighbor, the masked figure, the nightmare incarnate. That's the breaking point. You flee, leaving the neighborhood and the horror that lived next door. The fear stays with you, though, a lingering presence that makes you check your surroundings at every turn. You can't shake the feeling that, even in a new place, he might be watching, waiting for the right moment to turn your life into another chapter of his twisted horror story. So, Beware of your neighbors, my friends. You never know when the person next door might transform your life into a real-life nightmare. It's a horror show that leaves scars, a tale of tapping dolls, and a neighbor who turns your sense of safety into a twisted game of suspense.